To order. Good Monday morning to everyone. It's the last of a few winter days before I hope spring really starts. J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion
I now
numéro.
call this meeting to order. Welcome to the 7th meeting of the Citizenship and Immigration meeting of the House of Commons.
Madame Claude de Bellefeuille, bienvenue à vous. Bienvenue. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and the members today. For the participants in the room, I know you've done this a million times, but it's always nice to do a reminder. You could use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I will let you know once you have only 1 minute left. Kindly wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. Please do not speak over each other, as it will be very hard for our translators to translate, and it makes their job very difficult. Of course, kindly ensure that your comments are addressed through the chair, c'est moi. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and I thank you in advance for your cooperation. So, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on September 16, 2025, the committee is resuming its study of Canada's immigration system. Today, we're focusing on the 2026 Auditor General Report on International Student Program Reforms. I would like to now warmly welcome our witnesses for today's meeting. We have, from the Office of the Auditor General, we have Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada. Welcome. Nice to meet you. Gabrielle Lombardi, the Principal, and Erin Jelinek, Director, also from our office. Welcome. From the Department of Citizenship and Immigration, we have Ted Gallivan, Deputy Minister. Welcome, Deputy Minister. We have Alexis Graham, Assistant Deputy Minister, and Tara Lang, Director General, Admissibility. Thank you for being here. And finally, from the Canadian Border Services Agency, Aaron O'Gorman, we have as President. Thank you for being here as well. And can I just finish this, and then I will go to you, I promise, Mr. Redekop. Up to 5 minutes each will be given for opening remarks, and I believe we have opening remarks from both Ms. Hogan as well as from Mr. Gallivan. After which we are going to begin rounds of questions. So I think we've got Mr. Redekop off the top. So Mr. Redekop.
So, just a procedural question. Normally these meetings are 2 hours. This one's an hour and a half. Is there any reason why we can't go a full 2 hours today?
So typically the decision I had was typically we would have had this for maybe an hour and then a panel of witnesses for our immigration study. But because last week we were unsure of what was happening, I decided our clerk did not have enough. Well, the clerk had told me he needed far more time to actually put together a panel of witnesses. And because I felt that this was a big issue of importance, I put it from an hour to an hour and a half. So that was the reason.
So then I guess then I may ask the witnesses, would it be okay if we did the full 2 hours rather than the 90 minutes? Does anybody object to that?
Would you all be available until 1 o'clock today? I believe we have resources.
Okay,
yes?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. There's no objections. Madame de Bellefeuille, ça va pour vous? Oui, and then that's good.
Is it okay for you, Madame de Bellefeuille? Okay.
More time together. So I think with that, we'll begin with Ms. Hogan. Please, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Merci. Bonjour, Madame la Présidente. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for giving me the chance to testify today before the committee to talk about our report on the reforms of International Students Program that was tabled in March this year. I want to mention that I want to recognize that we are on traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. In this audit, we looked at Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada's implementation of reforms to the International Student Program. These reforms were intended to manage growth and strengthen integrity controls. Overall, we concluded that while the department reduced the number of new study permits issued, it fell short in other key areas. In 2024, the department issued just under 150,000 new study permits. This was well below the forecast of almost 350,000. Some provinces, particularly those with smaller populations, were disproportionately affected. For example, Newfoundland and Labrador and Saskatchewan were both expected to see a 10% increase in approved new study permits compared to the previous year. Instead, they both experienced a decrease of at least 59%.
Program's integrity controls. Although the department introduced a new tool to verify acceptance letters and had processes to identify potential fraud and student noncompliance, it did not effectively investigate or follow up when risks were flagged. For example, in 2023 and 24, designated learning institutions identified over 153,000 potential cases of noncompliance with study permits, but the department investigated only about 4,000 of them. Most cases could not be closed because the students did not respond to the department's requests for more information. Further, the department's fraud detection activities identified 800 cases of fraud after permits were approved. No follow-up occurred on these cases. In most instances, individuals went on to apply for other immigration permits while in Canada. More than half of those applications have since been approved. Our audit also identified an opportunity for better collaboration with the Canada Border Services Agency. We found that the Immigration Department did not collaborate with the agency to identify whether students with expired permits had left Canada. Using the Immigration Department's available data, we worked with the Canada Border Services Agency and found that only about 40% of the 39,500 students required to leave in 2024 had in fact left the country. Ultimately, the department needs to act on the information it already has to address integrity concerns in the program, including collaborating with the Canada Border Services Agency. This is equally important when students are in Canada and applying for additional permits. Madame la Présidente, je termine ainsi ma déclaration.
Madam Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Much, Ms. Hogan. Next, we go to Mr. Gallivan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In order to maximize time for questions, I'm not going to read my remarks. I'll just make a couple of quick points. Premièrement, j'apprécie grandement le rapport que ce comité.
First, thank you for the report that this committee submitted last week. This is very important information that will help you in the domain.
Is where the planned reforms to the student visa program had the intended effect. The overall numbers were down. The student direct stream had been wound down, and verification letters from the educational institutions had been implemented. We'll probably not spend a lot of time on those positive findings. I will say that the negative findings, in particular the lack of follow-through on fraud, are unacceptable. We've submitted management action plans to this committee, so hopefully you have that, at least with the clerk of the committee. For me, it was important that all of those actions would be completed in calendar 2026. It's important for us to address these quickly. And so with that, Madame la Présidente, je termine mes remarques et j'ouvre la session.
With that, Madam Chair, this concludes my statements, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
So we now have an extra half an hour, so we have lots of time for questions and answers. And I do want to say a huge thanks to you, Auditor General Hogan, to you and your entire team. The work that you do is extraordinarily important. You cannot have a functioning and healthy democracy if we don't have, a very strong Auditor General. So I want to say thanks to you. And thanks to all of you for your great work, but just I want to point that out to you. Okay, so we go into rounds of questions. We start with 6-minute rounds, and I believe that we begin with Mr. Redicott, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses, and especially welcome Mr. Galvin, as you're the new Deputy Minister. So I just want to jump right into it with the Auditor General. On letter of acceptance fraud, you talked about 51 applications where fraud was suspected and you found that the department didn't follow procedures in a quarter of those cases, either they were approved without looking into the fraud or the fraud wasn't flagged on their files for future use. Is that correct with what you saw?
Absolutely. We looked at a smaller sample of those that were flagged and found that the procedures that were supposed to be followed weren't followed. And this is key because many of the subsequent applications are sort of a light touch because it's assumed that there's rigor at the outset, and we didn't see that in some of the cases. Right.
So then, to you, Mr. Galvan, did you advise or did your department flag the government that you needed more time and resources to thoroughly investigate frauds like this? And I'm talking pre-receiving this report.
Madam Chair, fourth week on the job, so I wasn't here at the time, so I can't answer the question directly. What I will say is the number of high-risk cases or fraud ought to drive the budget rather than the other way around. And so in our management action plan, we are taking a commitment to review all of the cases, and where it's confirmed that it's not a discrepancy, but it's actual fraud, we need to take action, and we'll have to sort out the budget implications after the fact.
So I guess just on that answer, like, are all the answers from you going to be, I don't know, I wasn't here? Because if that's not going to help us in getting through this.
Madam Chair, I was asked a direct question about something that happened when I wasn't there, so I couldn't answer directly. I believe I addressed the substance of the question.
Did you get briefed on the do you know anything about the department, I guess? Let's start with that.
I do have information about the department,
okay.
Yes.
So are you briefed on this subject? Are you able to speak to it today?
I'm ready to talk about this audit. Okay. Absolutely.
So do you know anything about the question I asked then? Your answer was no. I guess I got that answer.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Fragiscatos.
This committee has found a way to work with one another in a very professional and collegial way. The Deputy Minister is new to the job, 4 weeks as he said. I think we should allow him the space to answer questions as he wishes and to not interrupt when he's trying to finish a sentence, just basic courtesy.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiscatos. Let's allow time for responses. Know that we've got right till 1 o'clock, so we have lots of time. Mr. Redcott, please continue.
And feel free to ask one of your assistants if you need the information. Did the government ask your department to be more thorough in terms of investigating fraud prior to receiving this report?
So again, Madam Chair, we're going to have trouble with prior to receiving this report or not. I would say we do need to tighten controls. We need to act more quickly, more aggressively, and more thoroughly in the face of discrepancies. The OAG pointed out a figure of 53,000. We ought to have had, at the time of the audit, evidence to show that many of them were discrepancies and weren't cases of fraud. We should have been able to say this is the number of fraud cases that we do suspect, and then we ought to have followed through on 100% of the cases of fraud.
Well, I recognize that you're new, and so I appreciate there's a lot to swallow and understand in the department. So in terms of your, the last 4 weeks, as you said, what have you discovered in terms of the culture of fraud and detection of fraud in the organization? Would you sense that it was a really high priority, or is it a gap, or what's your assessment of that as a new DM?
I think the department lacked what I would describe as a framework for dealing with this question of fraud in the student applications, from telling people what the rules are up front to following up to promote voluntary compliance with something like departing the country when the visa left. Practices and techniques like nudge. And so I think the department hadn't kind of thought through what are the interventions required to make sure that students follow the rules and that they depart the country when their student visa expired. And I think that's not always a removal straight to CBSA. There's a lot of things that ought to happen over the life cycle and the relationship between IRCC and the student to promote voluntary compliance to the laws of this country.
Do you get a sense that the department was being pressured by the government to process applications, and maybe that was affecting some of the thoroughness that was being taken?
I would describe the direction from this government of control, that we control these programs, and that would mean no risk applicants to the country get handled quickly and smoothly, and then people who don't meet the eligibility criteria get an intervention to ensure kind of compliance. And so my sense is we need to demonstrate that we've turned our minds to, in this case, people with a discrepancy. We need to figure out when the discrepancy is a timing issue or an actual mistake versus real fraud. And when there's real fraud, we ought to be taking action.
Then I think it's safe to say that, based on what the Auditor General found, that that was not being followed, and there was definite gaps in the department. On back to the Auditor General, you found that IRCC did not identify which students were expected to leave. This has to do with removal tracking and after permits had expired. And the report says in there, it says we identified, which means your department.
1 minute.
Was IRCC not aware of, and you talked about 39,500 individuals who shouldn't have been in Canada because they had lost their status. Was IRCC not aware of that number?
I think this is an example of where the department was just not acting on information that it had. So we had to go through their database with them to identify that there were 549,000 students or so that had expired permits, and then determine who had applied for another permit or not. And that's when we identified about 39,500 that didn't apply for another permit and should have left the country. So we worked within Canada Border Services Agency. So this collaboration is where I would expect the department to use that information to do this on a regular basis. We issued a recommendation to the Immigration Department, and we shared with them our analysis, so I trust that they'll act on it now going forward with the Canada Border Services Agency.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Thank you, Mr. Redekop. And before we go to our next interviewer, I'm still recuperating from some jet lag from travel I had last week, so I should have warmly welcomed our new Deputy Minister Gallivan. Thank you for being here. Mr. Redekop beat me to the punch, so thanks for doing that, Mr. Redekop. Okay, next we have 6 minutes for Ms. Sodi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. My first question is for you, Deputy Minister. Can you share with us what your department's response to the feedback shared in the Auditor General's report, and what steps will your department be taking to address these concerns?
I think I'll start with, managing the expiration of a visa. Because there are rules around the visas, not just for students, but more generally. In 2023, IRCC started warning students up front. An overstay has repercussions, including up to a 5-year ban from readmittance to the country. And back to my earlier response, I know I've asked the team to start pilot work around aggressively managing the end of the visa as a management control. And so we've got IT work underway. By the end of May, we'll have an indicator in the system indicating whether somebody is present in the country or not. I found it surprising that we hadn't previously had that, but we're going to have that indicator. And that's just a step in terms of changing the culture and our operational priorities around letting people know their obligation to depart Canada when their visa expires, and this is beyond student visas, then kind of just in time, and again, we have yet to learn, is it 2 weeks before, is it a month before, but communicating with people, and does phone work, does text work, how do you do it? But encouraging them to say, if you don't have another status in Canada, you ought to leave, and there are consequences, and kind of purifying the list. Because, the OAG did talk about the handoff to CBSA, but we don't want to send them a list of 100,000 people for removals when a lot of work needs to be done. First, to encourage people to do the right thing in the first instance. Second, to kind of nudge and get them to do it. And then finally, get the list down to a core number where perhaps an enforced removal is necessary.
You mentioned encouraging people to do the right thing, and if you could further elaborate on that, I think that would be great, because to do the right thing ultimately is the right thing, but to get people to do that can sometimes be a lot more easier said than done. So what are some steps that you would take to encourage people to do the right thing?
Well, the first is you can't rely on people doing the right thing totally. And so there has to be a consequence past that, actually. And so we have to make sure that there's a full continuum from telling people the rules to reminding them nicely to reminding them forcefully. And then we have to ensure there's a follow-through. And I know the CBSA has made efforts to increase enforced removals. And so part of it is the threat of no return visa. And so, to be really candid and direct, we have to make sure that that's a real threat. We have to make sure that IRCC is applying that rigorously, and then use that to kind of nudge people to do the right thing. And so I think back to the question about culture change, we can't fully rely on people to do the right thing. I think we want to create opportunities for them to do the right thing. I think we want to create an environment that incentivizes them to do the right thing. And then I think we also have to be clear that if they don't in the first instance, then there is a second and a third instance where more aggressive action is taken.
Perfect, thank you. And are you or any of the other officials from IRCC able to share with this committee what measurable improvements IRCC has observed in terms of application integrity and system integrity since certain reforms have been implemented?
I think I'll turn to Tara for some of the specifics, but I think beyond just the straight refusal approval rate, we've seen a change in terms of promoters and people who are kind of incentivizing or colluding with students around some of the fraudulent applications we're worried with. But maybe Tara will come in with some specifics on the improvements.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're seeing fewer asylum claims made by former students. Fewer LOA verifications in 2025 produced no match results than 2024. So that's suggesting the system is not only catching fraud, but also deterring it. Requiring students to apply for a new study permit when they transfer schools allows us to gather up-to-date data and information, and that helps us with the student compliance pieces. I think that the pilot that the deputy was speaking about is something that will be very concrete, and we're working actively with our colleagues in CBSA. So just to expand a little bit on what the deputy said is, we're talking about letters. So the concept is send a letter before, send a letter after, and then we would have an alert on file that would show for misrepresentation. So if the CBSA, again, being constrained from an enforcement point for removal stream, we could catch them if they ever applied for another application, and there would be more specific consequences like the 5-year bar. So we're trying to be a lot more proactive and help us help you. We want to have the right people in Canada, but if they're not following the rules, then they should not be here.
And with these reforms now in place, and you talked a little bit about it before too, but how is IRCC ensuring a successful international student program and balancing the stability of the system with these new integrity measures while also ensuring our immigration programs work efficiently to attract the best and the brightest of students and researchers to our educational institutions?
20 seconds, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just say that's around kind of understanding the client and facilitating the entry of legitimate, sought-after students, and then cracking down on those who are trying to game the system.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin, and thank you so much, Ms. Sodi. Maintenant, on a 6 minutes pour...
Now, 6 minutes for Ms. de Breufil. Yes, madam, I know my name is difficult to pronounce, but you're much better than most, I promise you. I hope you have your earpiece or you understand French, I hope. So this is my first question, Madam Auditor General. In your report, you indicated that in only 3 investigations, you saw that there were only 100 permits given that were fraudulent. So are you saying that if you did more controls, you would have seen more fraudulent cases? So you only found a few 100. So does it mean that there'll be more? Answer. Well, these are not investigations that we made. It's the department that did these investigations, but we received many reports. But we focused on those 3 ones where we saw fraudulent or erroneous information. So these were the ones that were more, but what was concerning is that there were 800 cases identified, and no action was taken on them. And so the department has to take action on the information that they get. Question. So you're saying that after the information was noted, there was no action made by CBSA to identify these fraudulent individuals so that the department could try to see whether these people were circulating across the different borders, for example? Answer. Well, before giving information to CBSA, I think that the Department of Immigration has to act. We need to have a sort of alert on an individual's file, for example. So we try to see where are these 800 individuals, and we were able to see that most of them were able to ask for another application for another immigration status, and about 50% of them had already been approved. But if action was done beforehand, it might have been more rigorous, and we would have avoided a situation where they have other immigration statuses. And this was actions that we can take before alerting CBSA. Question. So you said that many measures had been indicated, and you said that maybe if we use letters, we would ensure that people respect the law and voluntarily leave the country. Now, I don't know if somebody enters a country with a fraudulent student visa, do you think that you can have confidence that these people in the country would try to leave rather than attempt to find another means to stay in the country? Do you think that the measures that you're introducing will ensure that you achieve your goals? Answer. Madam Chair, I think I need to make a correction here. I think I said no, that there will be real consequences, including exclusion from the country for 5 years or physical removal from the country. So I want to correct that. No, we don't rely only on sending letters to these people. Secondly, we understand that, first of all, we need to identify fraud when there's the visa application. That should be the first step. And then, secondly, when we have identified a high-risk case, it doesn't make any sense to not follow up on those. So I mentioned that, and they didn't give me any reasonable reason why the follow-up was not done. So when we are doing 50,000 of 20,000 processes, we are going to try to identify where there are problems. So when we identify these problems, there should be follow-up, and I haven't received any valid excuse why there was no follow-up. Question. Well, in your report was quite notable in our community, I have to say. So I want to know, have you started the process? Can you give us examples of students who tried to be admitted with fraudulent documents? Do you have results to give us? Because you're talking about data from 2018 to 2023. So since you knew this information, I know you don't have this information since the report of the Auditor General, but you have this information since 2023. So concretely, do you have results to give us? Answer. Well, the fact that we are already canceling the direct access program, that was helpful. My colleague can give you more information about approvals. We reject a high percentage of these applications already, and that is the first line of defense. So we screen these visa applications. That's our first line of defense. Secondly, we ask the institutions to come and validate that these students are really studying in their institution. So that is a second level of defense. So this summer, we are making sure that these letters will be issued, especially where there are problems. We understand that some problems are not as severe as others. Sometimes it's just an omission, sometimes it's fraud, and we have to follow up. Are you speaking about this summer, the coming summer? Yes. So I think that the process was very long before you change your practices, right? Answer. Well, we believe that following the report of the Auditor General, we need to follow through with the recommendations that were made in her report this year. You have 10 seconds left. So thank you, Madame de Vellefeuille, and thank you, Mr. Gallivan.
We now begin second round, so we've got Mr. Menegakis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you and welcome to our committee. It's very kind of you to spend 2 full hours with us today. I'll start with you, Mr. Gallivan. Of the 800 confirmed issued permit holders who either used fraudulent documentation or misrepresented information on their application, 105 were approved for permanent residency. What was the government's justification for rewarding fraudulent study permit holders with PR?
Madam Chair, could you just repeat the last part of the question? I didn't hear it.
Sure. The question was, what was the justification for rewarding fraudulent study permit holders with PR?
I'm going to turn to Tara to explain a little bit in terms of the demographic and the analysis of the 800. But again, as I said in French previously, I have obtained no explanation for why the 800 was not pursued. So I don't know, and I do know going forward these kinds of cases will be acted on. But Tara, can you talk a bit about the 800?
Sure. So, not having seen the detailed cases themselves, I would have to assume. So, let's back up. The 800 were investigations that were a result of a quality assurance exercise. So, as the deputy explained, we take a snapshot of a number of cases, we do a review, and that found that 800, most of them were studied direct stream applicants, had some kind of fraudulent document as part of their application. The question about how would they become permanent residents, the officer who would have reviewed the permanent resident application would have had a conversation, a back and forth, what's called a procedural fairness letter, to ask the client the situation of the document and would have made a finding that either their response was acceptable, they got a new document. I wouldn't be able to kind of postulate on each case by case. It's on the basis of its merit. So I don't know that it's a reward, but there are checks and balances, especially when we move into a PR stream to check on those validity of documents.
So these 105 PR grants, were they reviewed for revocation once the initial misrepresentation was confirmed?
I do not know. I do know that now every single case does have an info alert placed on it, and they are being reviewed currently.
So the Auditor General also found that 110 of these permit holders filed assignment claims. Given the department's backlog on asylum claimants, are these individuals now receiving taxpayer-funded health and housing benefits, despite their pre-existing record of misrepresentation?
So, Madam Chair, the IRCC would flag in our systems when there is a case of misrepresentation. And let's be clear about the misrepresentation we're talking about. It's academic credential fraud. Somebody claimed to have a science degree, a master's degree when they have a bachelor's. Like, let's understand that. And I think, our reaction is to flag the applicant's account with an indicator. As Tara explained, that indicator gives rise to questioning, and through the questioning, the decision maker satisfies themselves with the answer to that question. But my sense of the process is a flag is placed on the system indicating there has been misrepresentation, which alerts people to ask better questions.
So I'd like to turn to our Auditor General. Would you agree that these are just small little misrepresentations, as the Deputy Minister just said, or would you think that the problem is a little bit more egregious than that?
Well, the applications in question didn't have any flags, and so none of this exchange would have occurred on these. What I'm hearing from the deputy and other officials from the Immigration Department is that that's their position now. But in these 800 cases, we did not see any flag appear on these files.
Okay. I want to ask you something, Mr. Galvin.
1 minute.
About the communication between your department and CBSA. In previous committee meetings here, we've had the CBSA testify that your department overruled decisions that they had made, specifically on when they have identified somebody who needs to be deported from the country. The CBSA has overruled the decision of the determination that the CBSA had made. Can you explain why your department feels that they should have that right to overrule the law enforcement agency that is at the front end of people coming into the country?
30 seconds.
Madam Chair, I have more than 3.5 years sitting in that chair as the Associate Deputy Minister at the CBSA, and not to dodge the question, Madam Chair, but I do have questions about the legal standard. And so I would just offer, it is a question that I'm actively pursuing. I do believe part of the longer answer that I can't give now relates to legal standards, thresholds, and what information people has, but I too share the concern. And if the concern is broader than the authorities that I have now, then I'll certainly make the representation to get to foster some kind of change. And so I appreciate the question. I appreciate the concern.
Thank you, Mr. Menegakis. Thank you, Mr. Gallivan, although we can continue with the answer and other questions. We now have Mr. Fragiscatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all officials for being here. Auditor General, good to see you again. And Mr. Galvin, congratulations again on your new role. I'll begin with you, Mr. Gallivan. Conservative friends, rather, are free to do it. They want to litigate the past. That's fine. But Canadians live in the present, and they're concerned about the future. With respect to the immigration system, you talked about control in a previous exchange. You talked about, well, you didn't use the word integrity, but ultimately that's what you're talking about. I want to ask a general question relating to those points. How is the government moving ahead to ensure control and integrity generally in the system? Can you point to some examples?
Sure. I'll start with the student visa program, which I think is an example of what's happening more broadly. And so you can see hard caps and a decline in numbers, and so fewer people across a broad range of categories, which allows for greater focus and so a reduction in numbers. Second, I think a hard cap around 1% and 5% in terms of the total number of people being accepted or in the country at any one given time. And so kind of managing so that we have managed sustainable migration into this country because it's essential. I would say, again, proper to this audit, the discontinuation of a direct program that was seen to be open for abuse and targeted for abuse by others, and you see that program being canceled. Recently introduced Bill C-12, you could see a process where thresholds are being established around claiming asylum at the 12-month, 1-year mark, and rapid action on that. In fact, there was a significant amount of media attention, Madam Chair, that just days after receiving royal assent, IRCC began taking action. And so it got more than 30 years in public service, and it was one of the first time I can recall being criticized or taken to task for acting too quickly on the implementation of legislation. And so I think, we want to be compassionate, we want to be fair, but in cases where there is abuse, I think I've given you some examples of where that's happening. Proper to this report, I think, again, when you have a large number of flags, you have a responsibility to parse them and put them into buckets. And back to the earlier question, no, the 110 or the 800 or the 150,000, they're neither all small typographical errors, and they're neither all cases of people with a propensity to violence. There's a mixture, but it's our responsibility to more methodically put them into categories and then give the right treatment. And that's what the OEG didn't find when she arrived at IRCC. And that's what the crux of our management action plan in response to this audit is. By the end of this calendar year, we will show that we understand the categorization of the people who are being flagged, and we're applying the right response. And no action is rarely the right response. It's certainly not the right response when it's flagged as high risk.
Go into that, as a matter of fact. You talk about categorization. Ultimately, you're talking about responding to the concerns raised by the Auditor General. How exactly, from an administrative point of view, will you be moving ahead? What areas of the report and the flags that were raised by the Auditor General are you most seized with responding to?
May I ask?
And how will the department respond?
I mean, I would talk about managing the end of a visa as a management objective and something for IRCC to validate and to be more proactive, aggressive, and thorough on the expiration of a visa. So simply put, we need to know whether people are leaving or not. It's our responsibility to seek that information and to build a picture of whether people are leaving or not. I think it's our job to manage towards that goal. And yes, we'll try the lighter touch efforts, but I think in complement with tougher consequences. And so I would say managing the end of the visa process more proactively and systematically would be one that I would say is a key shift in terms of how IRCC is looking at this problem.
Just very quickly, do you plan on looking at what other countries, G7 partners, for example, or like-minded countries have been doing to ensure integrity in their systems? And I'm speaking specifically here on the point about visas.
That work is already ongoing, and yes, we continue.
Thank you, Mr. Fredescaros. Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Maintenant, on a 2 minutes et demie pour...
Now we have 2.5 minutes for Madame de Bellefeuille. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I want to congratulate the interpreters who are here in person, and it's a clear difference from me, who is always 100% using the earpiece. I thank them for being there, and it makes a world of difference. So, Madam Auditor General, I want to ask you questions about containers, and we're changing topics today. I'm sure you're happy about that. Well, I have a hard time understanding that you're not necessarily targeted by the Auditor General's report, but you are a partner of the department. Because I personally have experienced situations where students, even with their study permits, cannot cross the border because you are able to identify fraud at the border. So can you tell us, with what we're studying today, what is your role today? Are you waiting for best practices, better practices from the department? What can you do to improve the intervention of the department in the subject that we're discussing today? Answer: yes, we are a partner, and everyone who enters Canada has to come across one of our agents. So if somebody has a student visa, if something is flagged, we can take action. And at the end of their stay, if someone is not supposed to stay in the country, we can send them back. I will switch into English.
We are partners, but we're along a continuum. And so what IRCC is doing is putting more rigor into the system of student visas. Sometimes people who are on student visas also find themselves with serious inadmissibility, and I won't overstate those numbers. They're not significant, but we have seen people involved in extortion, and so they do become a priority for removal by CBSA. Some of them will make an asylum claim, and if they are not successful, they will become a priority for the CBSA. And also in terms of entry-exit data. So we will work in partnership with IRCC in terms of determining who's here. We can do that kind of on the bulk review of names of people who might be on expired visas and continue to be here. But as Mr. Gallivan said, with the reforms they're putting in place, those numbers should get smaller as they put more things into the system to bring people into compliance or proactively identify people who are out of compliance.
Thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. Merci, Madame de Bellefeuille.
Thank you, Madame de Bellefeuille.
Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Auditor General, the answer that Ms. O'Gorman just gave about that, do you have any comments or additions to make to that?
I think the only thing I would add is that the Canada Border Service Agency wasn't part of our original audit because our intention was to look at the reforms that the Immigration Department was bringing to the student visas. We can't ignore when we find, however, weaknesses, and that's why we ended up going to the Canada Border Services Agency to sort of determine what was happening with individuals who hadn't left the country when their permits has expired. So we felt we had a gap and we were trying to fill it. We can't issue a recommendation to an entity that's not in our audit, but I'm very happy to see CBSA here to help support a good study of this.
So would you suggest additional audit capacity?
For us, you
Yes,
mean, to do an audit on this? Well, I feel like we took this one right to the end. We identified a gap where there wasn't sharing of information that is clearly in the possession of the Immigration Department, and it's now for the two entities to establish a good process to decide when action is needed. It's important to note that hundreds of thousands of students are here, and they are genuine students. Mm-hmm. But when there is information that flags that they should leave the country or are not here under genuine pretenses, then some action should be taken.
Well, thank you for that, because Mr. Gallivan, I want to follow up with that. You said, there's a 5-year ban. You want to, use a soft touch. You want to. The threat of a 5-year ban, like, is there a threshold? I mean, if somebody exceeds their visa, do they automatically get the 5-year ban?
I'm not sure of the technical answer. I don't know if my colleagues do, but I'm not. They don't.
They don't. So
it's not automatic.
So is maybe Ms. Lang can answer this. Is there a threshold? Is there sort of a metric that an analysis that you would go through? I mean, if somebody overextends their stay, I'm sure if it's accidental, well, I can't imagine how it can be accidental if they're coming to the country, they know what the term limits are. But what are the areas that would exempt somebody from a 5-year ban?
So a lot of it does have to do with those types of questions. So misunderstanding of the deadline for leaving, other applications that could be in process to regularize their stay in other areas. So the officer would be looking at those types of situations, but there is no kind of sliding scale.
So it's somewhat subjective.
Either it's 5 years or it's you regularize your status.
Okay, so Ms. O'Gorman, are you adequately resourced for the system, with the system in place now?
The thing about CBSA is there's always more narcotics to catch. There are always more people to remove. There are always more organized crime members exploiting the border. So, hard question to answer. We would put any additional officers to good use. But in terms of the study today, what Mr. Gallivan has outlined is the efforts they will make to bring people back into compliance and or identify fraud and nudge people and have consequences for people. And those people for whom that doesn't work become our clients in our removal inventory, and we will remove them as we remove other individuals. But the fewer people that come into our removals inventory because they're out of compliance is better for the system. So it's an expensive prospect to have a CBSA officer find somebody to remove them. We prioritize serious inadmissibility, failed claimants, but we also do remove people who are out of compliance. But some of the integrity measures that IRCC will be putting in, I think we will see a big impact on that, and students viewing the consequences of not being able to come back for 5 years will be severe and will lead to some of the behaviors that we would like to see.
I have limited time. I may follow up on this later, but on March the 9th, I asked Mr. Bush a question about capacity at holding detention capacity at the border crossings. I should have expanded the question to include immigration holding centers, because the answer I got back, he committed to getting back to me saying that capacity at the ports of entry has not changed. But has capacity at immigration holding centers, has that decreased or changed in the last year?
Well, it's increased in the last year. At one point, 3 years ago, we had access to provincial facilities. Yes. And when we lost that, we lost a significant amount of our capacity. So since then, we've been building up capacity. We have now a footprint in a federal institution. We have added staff to our 3 immigration holding centers.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, and thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. Next, we have 5 minutes for Ms. Zaid.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for appearing before the committee. I would like to, before I go to the questions, I would like to congratulate the Deputy Minister, Mr. Gallivan, for taking this position and this important file. So wish you all the best. My first question is for IRCC. So, Mr. Gallivan, what concrete steps has IRCC taken to understand the unexpected drop in study permit approval rates? And how is that analysis now improving the forecasting and the decision-making process?
Thank you for the question, and I may turn to Alexis to kind of add a bit. But I would say in the 2025 allocation in January 2024, for example, IRCC adjusted the provincial allocations to better reflect the feedback from the initial year. I think our go-forward plan is to meet with them this spring to talk about ways to tweak the model. We've also begun to share more detailed, rich data packages with the jurisdictions themselves, because as you may know, the provinces aren't using the full allocation that we're providing them. So we have a responsibility to get the provincial allocations right. Then the provinces need to further divide that within their jurisdictions. And so we're attempting to we will be providing them better data to enable them to do that more effectively. And then a follow-up session in the fall to see if there's additional tweaking. But Alexis, is there anything you'd add to that?
Not too much more to add. The audit did find that IRCC's approval rates are aligned with the regional and country-specific risk assessments. So I think a lot of this has to do with kind of transitioning from one highly facilitative regime to one where we have more controls and more discipline, and it takes time for the various actors to sort of adjust to that. Like the deputy said, we have lots of engagement points with them and plan to enhance that in the future. So hopefully that will enable provinces to use more of those allocations and support their planning purposes as well. Thanks.
Sorry. How is your department, IRCC, improving clarity and consistency in the financial documentation requirements so applicants better understand what is expected of them?
Maybe turn to colleagues on that, but I do want to come back to a point raised about the 5-year ban. In 2023, IRCC started to make more clear to students the consequence of an overstay. So can appreciate that the 5-year ban is subjective and subjected to judgment, but I think the table was set back in 2023 in terms of making the rules of the game pretty clear. Alexis or Tara, anything on?
So just to note, the financial requirement has been now increased from 10,000 to 20,000 for students. So that just really is intended to ensure that they meet the low income cutoff so that they can support themselves here. So our officers do a verification to ensure that they have that amount of money to be able to ensure that they're not kind of falling through the cracks while they're in Canada.
But I did take careful note of the committee report suggesting that we revisit upward that financial threshold and also the concern on the extension, how do we dive deep or not? And so we will be taking back how do we handle a check-in on the financial solvency of a student during the renewal process.
My next question is also in regards to how the IRCC and how are you working with the provinces in making a decisions that which subjects are you doing some research on the market trends or the need in the market? Because some colleges do have those concerns that some programs are being cut down. So are you working with the provinces on that, or the decisions are being made just by provinces?
No, so we work very closely with provinces, and the way that it works for the student program, of course, is we set sort of the national cap, and then each province is provided an allocation sort of based on historical approval rates, capacity, things like that, et cetera. So we definitely need to work very closely with them to understand kind of how this change is transpiring in their jurisdictions to see if we can tailor things and, as the deputy said, tweak in a way that's going to be kind of maximizing the number of those quality and genuine students that we see within each jurisdiction.
Do I have time?
30 seconds.
Quickly, can you explain how the letter of acceptance and verification system is strengthening the program integrity and what is being done to ensure all flag cases are investigated?
I think up front it would have had a deterrent effect. Just the presence of the letter would encourage people to do the right thing. Where we are now, as said previously, is we've got to manage the exceptions and the discrepancies that those letters are identifying and follow through on them, and also audit the institutions to make sure they're complying.
Thank you, Ms. Zaid. Thank you, Mr. Galavan. Next, we're starting our third round of questioning. It's going by very quickly this Monday morning, and we will have 5 minutes with Mr. Ho.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My questions would be for Ms. Hogan. In your Auditor General report on international students, you found 153,000 potentially non-compliant international students in 2023 and 2024. But the Immigration Department launched only 4,000 investigations. Would it be fair to say that the Immigration Department was receiving warning signs at scale and largely not acting on them?
So it wasn't our audit that flagged the 153,000 cases. That's actually the department that flagged it. I would tell you this is an example of them having information and needing to act on it. This is where learning institutions must report whether or not they believe the student is complying, so full-time studies. We saw that only 4,000 cases were investigated in the 2 years that we looked at. What the department explained to us is it was for lack of funding. And so while I understand the funding aspect, I would have expected that when the 4,000 cases that were investigated, that they would have taken it right to the end. And we saw that about 40% of those were closed even though the student just stopped communicating, and that isn't determining whether or not the individual's following the conditions of their permit. So I would expect them to take it right to the end when they do investigations, even with limited funding.
Do you, with what you've just said, do you feel that the government has the international student program under control?
Well, I would tell you that I think they should act on the information they have now before they decide if they need more funding or how they want to move about things. The majority of students are here for a genuine reason. And we're talking about a few 100,000 cases where there is some potential concern. You need to give the student the time to clarify and then, if not, take appropriate action. But having all of this data and not acting on it is not acceptable.
Sounds like they need to get their priorities in check. So, in your report on international student permits, you describe a, quote, light touch approach used by the Immigration Department to study permit extensions. Could you expand on what you meant by light touch?
So light touch was not as rigorous as an initial application should have been. The concern here is that many of the extensions came through the student direct stream, which was a light touch stream. And when you look at the data of who was applying through that stream, a significant portion of them came from one country that had been identified as high risk. So we saw a disconnect between the risk rating of a country, the light touch applied in the initial application, to then double down on a light touch in the subsequent application. So we flagged concerns here. I mean, it's important to know that that study or that direct stream is now canceled, but now you need to not just do a light touch on every single extension. You do have to go back and decide if they were high risk and not treated with enough rigor at the front end.
Do you think that this so-called light touch approach has contributed to the non-compliance issues we've witnessed?
I think that's a difficult one to answer. I would expect that a light touch apply to countries with lower risk ratings, and we saw an inconsistency there. But as I mentioned, that's sort of been closed. But a light touch is good for expediting.
Right, but you did see some high-risk countries where a light touch was inappropriately used.
Yes, when we flag those through the student direct stream, but as I mentioned that in 2024 that stream was closed.
Right.
But it means you need to apply rigor on anyone that came through that stream when they apply for other immigration status.
So you found in your report that roughly 549,000 people whose study permits expired in 2024, about 93% were allowed to remain in Canada. And of the 39,500 of those appeared to have no status. A whopping 60% of that 39,500 still remain in Canada. Does that indicate a major gap between permits expiring and actually enforcing the rules that are attached to them?
45 seconds.
I think this indicates how rigor was applied maybe at the front end of the application process, but that the department needs to do a better job once people are in the country and then clearly identify whether they're complying at the end of a permit. And I've heard the deputy talk about reforms that they're going to bring there, but we didn't see it during our audit period.
The last few seconds, my question to you, last question to you, Ms. Hogan, is do you think the Immigration Department under this government has been far too reactive and fragmented?
I mean, that's a very difficult question for me to answer, given I looked at just the international student program.
In this specific instance, is it too fragmented?
Well, I think here they
reactive?
responded to their main goal, which was to reduce the number of international students in the country, but they failed to act on information they had in their possession and maintain the integrity of the program throughout all steps.
Thank you, Ms. Hogan, and thank you, Mr. Ho. Next, we have 5 minutes for Mr. Zuberi.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'aimerais commencer avec...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to start with heartily congratulating the Deputy Minister Gallivan. Thank you for being here today, and congratulations on your new position. I will start with the President of CBSA.
We've heard a fair amount about removals and the message being passed from IRCC to CBSA around removals. Can you walk us through the process how those removal orders are actually implemented at the CBSA level, including by frontline officers?
Sure. So stepping back, broadly speaking, for all removal orders, when somebody does not have status in Canada because they have an expired permit that's not in an application, they have not been granted refugee status, or they have serious inadmissibility, CBSA will issue a removal order and must execute the removal as soon as possible. But people can have removal orders while they're still going through processes, in which case they're not enforceable. So there are many people with removal orders who might be appealing to the federal court, might be appealing to the refugee division, and so we won't act on those. So when a removal order becomes actionable, it goes into our removals in process, and they're actioned by the officers.
And that makes sense as long as there are procedures left to follow by the applicant, that it makes complete sense that they would not be removed from Canada until they've exhausted all of their possible avenues, including a pre-removal risk assessment, etc. But we hear so much about what's happening south of the border, just for those who are listening and paying attention, ICE, etc. But at the same time, we do have to enforce the law and remove people that are not supposed to be on our soil. How do you do that? And I just want to, for those who don't know much about this, because we're hearing so much about what's happening south of the border, what is our way of upholding the law while doing it respectfully?
Well, as IRCC, we have procedural fairness. We want people to voluntarily leave the country. That's the law, and that's the law that people must be following. And when they don't, the CBSA officers will invite them in for a pre-removal interview. We'll go through the processes, we'll discuss their personal circumstances, and then we'll facilitate that removal with them. People do abscond, and I might just, if I may, to the question of our capacity, for immigration facilities, holding facilities, I spoke about our people capacity, but our actual physical capacity has decreased. So I want to make sure that I was clear in answering that question. And we have investigators who find people who don't want to be found or who have absconded. And if we feel that they are a flight risk, we will hold them in detention and they will be removed. But by and large, we seek to make the arrangements voluntarily with people, having regard for their circumstances.
And those circumstances in detention are well monitored, and we ensure that everyone is, respected while in that process.
Yes, and it's after 48 hours, the decision to detain people is transferred to the Immigration and Refugee Board. And so CBSA will, if they believe the person is a threat to public safety, or whether we feel that they are a flight risk, we will make that representation to the Immigration and Refugee Board. But it's actually the board that determines whether the person will continue to be detained or not.
1 minute.
What happens when somebody in detention makes an allegation they've been mistreated? How do you end up handling that?
So several ways, depending on what that is. We have the Red Cross that does come in and do regular reviews of our detention, and they have access to whatever they want to have access to. Depending on the nature of the investigation, we will do it ourselves, or we will have another body come in and do that. We don't want to keep people in detention. If they have more processes that they can follow through and they're not a risk to public safety, we don't want them in our detention. They're by definition not going to be a flight risk because they might have an appeal to the federal court. Those that are on a removal order and are a risk to public safety, we want to remove them from the country. And so we don't actually want to have people detained for long periods of time, and the IRB oversees that quite rigorously.
Thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. Thank you, Mr. Zuberi. For members, the white lights were flashing, and it was just because the House was suspended. I think it's now back in session. Okay, next. Bienvenue à Monsieur Champoux.
Welcome to Mr. Champoux. It's your turn, 2 minutes and a half. Thank you, Chair. I would like to continue where my colleague stopped earlier. Madam Hogan, in your investigation, you identified 153,000 suspected cases of non-compliance between 2023 and 2024, and only 4,000 157 investigations were made. Is that correct? Is that information correct? Yes, the figures are correct. Question. So is it common practice that we would not investigate on this small sample because 98% of the cases were not investigated? Is this a common practice? Is it acceptable to you? We asked ourselves the question, and the department answered that it's because of budgetary constraints. So I would have expected at least that the 4,000 investigations would have been done to the end, but we only noticed that 40% were closed because of lack of communication with the students, and that does not answer the question as to whether the student was studying full-time and was respecting the conditions of their permit. Question. So they decided that they're not collaborating, so we'll drop it because we don't have the budget to continue the investigation, so we will let go. Mr. Gallivan, can you confirm that the department simply decided for lack of communication that we would not pursue the investigations, which I believe is important because these would be fraudulent requests, right? Answer. The shortcomings, the work we are doing started after the Ms. Hogan's report. So now what we're doing is that what we know is that many of these students have legal status here. This is about 33,000 that are questionable. And I explained before you came here that there is a number of suspected cases that need to that require additional effort. And as far as I know, Madam Chair, there are some cases where the investigations were unanswered and they indicated high risk, and we had to be more aggressive. But what Ms. Hogan said is that we closed those cases, and that is unacceptable. Question. So what should we do to reopen those cases? Because there's a high risk, as you say, it's unacceptable, and these people are in an irregular status on the country. Well, our department will deploy several interventions to see how we can control the situation, and we have to address those who do not meet the conditions.
Next, we start the list again over on the Conservative side. We have 5 minutes for Mr. Redekop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hogan, you know, in your report, there's a lot of mentions of fraud, a lot of volume of files to process. Department missed a lot of things. That's kind of the gist of a lot of it. Do you think that the large volume of applications that the department was faced with in the last few years, do you think that that took the focus away from things like fraud and being able to fully investigate things?
It's a difficult question to answer. I would tell you that every application that comes in, they must treat, and so we did see them go through all of those files, but they do need to do a better job at managing risk once individuals are in Canada. So it did appear to be that the focus was getting through the applications, but then a more rigor is needed throughout the entire process, and then as well at the end. So this is all information they had, just information they need to compile and then act on.
Which is consistent with what you're talking about, the 4,000 cases that they didn't seem to, number one, investigate more than 4,000, and even of those, finish those. And the answer was budgetary constraints, but as you point out, you know, that maybe shouldn't have been the overall thing. And I would say that, you know, they have a $6 billion budget with over 10,000 employees. It's a priority issue. Would you agree with that?
Well, I agree that budget constraints rule every action that any department takes, but if you're going to only investigate a small portion, then you should do that effectively. And I am hearing that the deputy is going to take steps to improve that going forward.
So on that then, so the overall tone of the report was there's fraud, the department missed a bunch of stuff, and as we're hearing today, it's kind of like, oops, we missed that, but we got this, we're going to fix it. Do you think they got this? Like, how are you feeling about the path forward here?
Well, I haven't seen a detailed action plan yet. Normally, we would see that when the department comes to a committee. So I look forward to seeing the actions that will be taken. I'll have the opportunity to follow up on these recommendations. My office is starting a new process this year where we're waiting 3 years after our audit report, and we're going to go in and start following up on recommendations so that we can actually see if action is happening. But again, it's about managing risk, and I would expect that the higher higher risk items are acted on to their fullest extent, given there is limited resources across all departments.
One of the other things that we've heard at this committee a lot, and we're hearing it a little bit today, and I think you might have seen some of this in your looking at the department, is IRCC will say it's not our job to remove people from the country. CBSA will say, well, we can't remove people if we don't know that they need to leave. And then we have also got the IRB over here who's saying, you know, we are our own independent agency, you can't tell us what to do. So we have these three groups that struggle to work together, and you've discovered some of that in your investigation. Should there be an overall systems approach to auditing the system that we have, given that we have these different departments, you know, from application or to approval or removal or, you know, into the asylum system, to get away from this finger pointing? Would it make sense to have a look at it system-wide?
I think that's a luxury that our office enjoys, and that we can take a step back and look at a process from start to finish. As I said here, we set out to just look at the reforms, but didn't ignore when we saw a gap. But I think if you look back at what a Canadian will see when they look at their government, they see us all in one big box together, and they don't see all of these silos on how we like to divide up work. And I would have expected better collaboration, which is exactly why we issued a recommendation to do that, to share information amongst the federal family so that you know, cases that need to be acted on can be acted on.
Mr. Gallivan, you said you need to know whether visas are expired and people are leaving, which I think is important. But that also implies that RCC didn't know if people were leaving. Is that a fair statement?
I would describe the prior approach as more reactive on an exceptions basis if they thought there was a problem. I would also describe the amount of time, you know, an annual process versus actually acting before the person's visa expired. So I would say both the timeliness and the thoroughness weren't where they needed to be.
But the reality is that the department didn't pay a lot of attention to whether people were leaving. I mean, that's what the Auditor General found, is that you didn't know.
Well, again, I share, you know, it's a small symbolic statement, but we didn't have an IT indicator indicating whether somebody was in the country or not in our IT systems.
1 minute.
Ms. O'Gorman said that now they will have consequences in referring to people who are, you know, abusing the system. Do you agree that people will now have consequences with some of the things you're talking about?
I think it's essential, actually, and back to kind of a theme that a number of members have explored, Madam President, the idea that the soft touch, the nudge, only works if people know there's a real consequence. And so there has to be, in order for the polite, please leave, your visa is expired, to work, there has to be a real consequence, or else they're just hollow words. So, Madam Chair, I think the kind of tough consequences are not just appropriate, but they're essential to making the other interventions effective.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Thank you, Mr. Redekop. We just have 7 seconds left. Okay, 7 seconds.
The important thing in that answer is that there were no consequences before. That's the implication in your answer, and I think that's important that people know that, because that's what's caused a lot of this problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Redekop. Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. I just wanted to alert everyone that the clerk just received the IRCC detailed management action plan in terms of addressing the audit on international student programs. So that should be all in your inboxes momentarily. Okay, next we have 5 minutes for Ms. Sodi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to turn to you, Ms. O'Gorman. And I was wondering if you can tell the committee how recent reforms to the international student program improved CBSA's abilities to verify that students entering Canada meet their study permit conditions.
So just in terms of what the deputy has outlined is collaboration in terms of who's still here and determining whether people who had a student visa expire left and whether further action doesn't now need to be taken. And so that's a collaboration that will take place between the two organizations in terms of looking to see who's still here. CBSA maintains the entry-exit system, and so we have that information that can be examined at a greater rate than IRCC, who can go in and look at individuals, whereas we can kind of run bigger inventories against that, and that's a collaboration that's that's happening and will continue to happen.
Yeah, and what trends are you seeing in compliance rates among international students upon entry compared to previous years?
So I think it's a bit early to answer that question. It's too early to answer that question.
Okay. And do you believe, well, how are frontline officers trained to apply updated program rules while ensuring a fair and efficient experience for legitimate students?
So as international students arrive at the port of entry, our officers are very adept at detecting any fraud. IRCC, in some cases, before they issue a student visa, will have the individual subject to security screening, and that's conducted in part by CBSA. So I should have started with that. Sometimes before a student visa is issued, somebody is subject to security screening. When they are issued a student visa and they come to the port of entry, the officers examine that and, like I said, are very adept at detecting fraud and can pose questions if they think there are any issues.
Okay. And let me know if this is too early to answer as well, but have you seen any early indicators that the reforms are helping deter bad actors from attempting to exploit our system?
So the cancellation of the program was quite important for CBSA. So in that sense, yes. The audit makes the point about high-risk countries and that we're subject to that program. So I will say in that context that did have a positive impact.
Okay. IRCC has committed to providing CBSA annually with a list of individuals whose study permits have expired and who have not transitioned to another immigration status. When you receive that list from IRCC, how quickly do you anticipate that your agency will be able to match it against entry and exit records to identify who has departed and who might still be in Canada without status? And if Mr. Gallivan, you need to answer that, you can too.
I don't want to speak for Ms. O'Gorman, but I think there's been some refinement in our thinking. I think there's going to be a lot more active effort before that list is provided to the CBSA. So in other words, we're going to seek in the first instance to determine whether people have left the country or not. And then we're going to try to influence before that deadline occurs. And then we might have a couple of attempts after. In other words, we want to bring the numbers down and try to manage the population so that they do leave the country before having to kind of pass it over to CBSA for active enforcement action.
And we said annually. There's nothing holding us to annually, quarterly, semi-annually. So we will get to a cadence that makes the most sense.
Who are confirmed to be in Canada without valid status, how will your agency prioritize follow-up, and how does the international student population fit within broader enforcement priorities that the CBSA might have?
Well, and that's what makes the work that IRCC is doing that Mr. Gallivan has outlined so important. So CBSA prioritizes serious inadmissibilities, war crimes, serious criminality, terrorism. We also prioritized failed asylum claimants, and then everybody else. And so we have people that will move between those categories. Most students are genuine, and I think will remove themselves off the basis of the work that's being discussed today. Some have come for the wrong reason, and they may find themselves in our serious inadmissibility category. But every year we do remove individuals who are out of compliance with their immigration status as a matter of course. And so we'll continue to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sodi, and thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. That completes our third round of questions, and now I feel like we're in a boxing match, but this is a friendly one. So we're in our fourth round, and we begin with the very friendly and happy Mr. Menegakis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There seems to be, I'm going to address my first questions to you, Ms. Hogan. There seems to be a disconnect between the government's attitude that conservatives want to talk about the past, but Canadians want to talk about the future, than what is actually happening on the ground, what we are actually hearing from Canadians on a daily basis. I represent a community in the Greater Toronto area that is home to a large segment of Canadians of Iranian descent. There's a lot of concern in the community about the reported 700, if not more, IRGC operatives that are living in our community and threatening Canadians and permanent residents and temporary visa people on a daily basis. So I want to touch a little bit on the light touch and file review process. I'm wondering if you would consider doing a deeper dive in auditing that process that has historically and very recently allowed people like RGC operatives into our communities, because they're not just the past, they're present, and they're an issue in the future unless this is addressed.
So my office has done work in the past, but it has been quite some time on removals. We always, as we sit down and look at what audits to do in a coming year, debate when to go back to certain things. But as I mentioned, it is our intention to start following up on recommendations in a much more rigorous fashion every year. So those might eventually get scooped in. So I can't tell you whether I will do an audit. I'll definitely make sure it gets added to our list of things to consider as we move forward.
Well, I would deeply appreciate it if you gave it some serious consideration. I understand Mr. Gallivan is new to the job, and admittedly, he has inherited a mess. And I can understand why he's got to focus on implementing things that will change the way the department has functioned and focused in the future. The 153,000 number is astounding, given that 2,000 people per year over 2 years were really looked into. At that rate, children today in daycare would be 80 years old before you get through the list of the 153,000, because there's a budgeting issue, and yet all kinds of people could be in the country in the meantime, creating, in some instances, havoc. Admittedly, not all are a major issue, but some are. And they seem to have found a way to game the system. Your report found that 1,600 investigations into non-compliant students were simply dropped because the individuals failed to respond. IRCC's policy is to make just 2 contact attempts over 6 months before marking the file inconclusive. Does this, in your opinion, mean that a student looking to evade the law, for them, the most effective strategy would be to simply not respond to the government's emails, to the government's requests?
I think young individuals today would say this is ghosting. So ghosting the department seemed to have no consequences, but I am hearing very clearly that the deputy minister is intending to make sure that there are consequences with follow-up. So time will tell whether that changes going forward.
So when these 1,600 individuals didn't respond, did you find that IRCC took any enforcement action, or were they allowed to keep their permits and remain in Canada despite being under active investigation for noncompliance?
Well, I would tell you, I don't think it was active investigation. The files were closed when communication stopped, and then no further action was taken. So that isn't actually what the investigation was supposed to do. The investigation was supposed to identify whether or not the person was complying with the terms of their study permit, in this case, studying full-time. It is very likely that there are some who are genuine students, and they need to be given the opportunity to demonstrate that, but when they're not, then an action should be taken.
You also said there are clearly tools in their toolkit, things that they can do when fraudulent documentation was used, or if a student isn't following conditions of their permit. We didn't see them consider that in these 800 cases, is what you said. What are those tools, and why do you think the government wasn't willing to use them?
I mean, we've heard the Deputy Minister talk about some of those tools. There could have been a flag placed on a file to ensure that any subsequent immigration application would have contemplated and considered that the initial application used fraudulent documentation. There could be, they could work through the process and ban an individual. They could cancel the permit and take whatever actions needed to remove them. But those are all elements that are in the toolkit. But we saw in these 800 cases that none of them had been considered.
So it is our hope, Mr. Gallivan, that you will take all of this into consideration, because it is a mess that you have inherited, sir, and it's going to take a lot of work to fix it.
Thank you, Mr. Menegakis. Thank you, everyone else who responded. Okay, next we are 5 minutes to Mr. Fredescatos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gallivan, you already referenced the report that this committee worked on. Thank you very much for looking at it, for reading it. That's an important report that committee members worked on together, and I'd say quite well. Can you look at the issue, or can you explore the issue of the provinces? I know the provincial role has been touched on by Ms. Graham here today. at least in brief. But what we heard at that in those various hearings was the critical role that the provinces play with respect to the international student program. I think one of the things that somehow transpired over the previous years is that the blame, and no one's hiding from it, there were very serious issues that came up, challenges that came up, mistakes that were made that led to where we are now. But this was placed entirely on the previous federal government's shoulders. The provinces have a very important role in all of this and what transpired. How are you engaging, or how is IRCC engaging provinces to ensure better outcomes that ultimately aim at integrity?
So there's, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. There's a number of formal and informal mechanisms. I've had bilateral meetings with, I think, 3 or 4 of my provincial colleagues, and will in short order meet all of them. There's also a multilateral forum at the ministerial level. Our next meeting, I think, is in June. And so I think there is an ongoing dialogue with all of the provinces around their needs. I do also think the educational institutions are active stakeholders. I have met with representatives of University Canada, a number of other college and individual institutions even have reached out. And so I do think the stakeholders are ready to speak. And it's our role in the department to kind of take those meetings, to always listen. Maybe we don't always agree, but to take that feedback in mind. I do think sharing the information is really important. I think, people can only make decisions and recommendations based on the information they have. And so, Alexis may want to add to this, but I do think giving them data about their own programs and provincial responsibilities in the area of education is vitally important. And so I did take careful note that that's something that we needed to do better at. And I know Alexis has had a couple of meetings, maybe with Ontario already. So Alexis, do you want to add anything in terms of provinces?
Sure. So there are, as the deputy mentioned, many kind of ways, formal and informal, that we engage provinces and territories. We are starting to actually work with them on an overall engagement plan that takes into consideration the priorities that they would like to discuss, rather than having us simply sort of impose an agenda. So really taking this work quite seriously and trying to develop a more robust set of discussions that bring all of our programming into that conversation, where things can actually be, where there can be links made between programs, and we can explore more around how we can complement each other's work and use all of our various levers together. When it comes to this program specifically, there are a number of working groups at senior levels, but also at working levels to kind of work through the details. So part of that is data, empowering ourselves with data, and being more transparent around that in terms of who's in which location, on which type of permit. And those are all things that are ahead and planned for the subsequent discussions that we're having with them shortly.
I have about a minute left, and if there's, it's not a simple question, and I think there's another round that we'll probably get to, so I might follow up there. But Mr. Gallivan, you mentioned the U15. Universities, as a result of changes that have happened, do have continued questions about the place of the international student program and what the federal government's message is. What is a message that you would put forward to universities, whether it's those in the U15? I represent London, that's where Western is, so this question comes from that point of view, but in general to all post-secondary institutions, not just universities, on the direction forward.
I think short and medium term. Short term is probably what the game plan is for 2027, and then medium term beyond. And my ask of them was, let's set an agenda for both. It's a little tight for the 2027 plan. We'll consult, but even more ambitious into 2028 and onwards. And so, very transparently, I opened the door to let's talk about a regime that seems to make sense. I mean, it feels like an accounting exercise a little bit in terms of the pockets and the numbers and the rules, and maybe a little bit of simplification would be good to allow, again, legitimate students to get through it a little more quickly, and to us focus on those people who are trying to game the system.
Thank you, Mr. Frederiskatos. Thank you, Mr. Gallivan. C'est à vous, Monsieur Champoux, 2 minutes et demie.
Merci beaucoup.
Over to you, Mr. Champoux. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Logarman, are you involved in the process at any point in time before the resources have been depleted? When are you informed, for example, that there's an investigation about possible cases of irregular statuses? And when, at what point in time can you bring your support to the department? When are you involved? Answer. Well, we're not involved in the processes that Mr. Gallivan talked about, that is the nudges or consequences like being banned from Canada for 5 years. For us, the more efficient way to do things is to give space to IRCC to manage their program. But as we said, we can review our data to see who is in the country, but we would like to have the shortest possible list after they have done all of their work. Question. In the case that Mr. Gallivan talked about, whereby we have students who we are trying to contact them because they are suspected of having supplied fraudulent information to get their permit, why are you not immediately involved in cases where we have people who do not answer and we have been forced to stop the investigation concerning them for any kind of reason? Can CBSA not be involved at that point in time to help the department find these people to answer, or you find them and send them to answer the questions, or be removed? Because I think you need to talk to each other to have a more firm reaction. Answer. Well, I have to say that we are not better placed than IRCC to follow through up to some point in time. Now, if IRCC cannot find them at all, they have done everything they could, absolutely, we come into play. But if they do not have the number, etc., do you mean that they can just disappear? Mr. Gallivan, what do you think? Well, I think that we need to better share information, because if I try to contact that person and they try to cross the border, and they would be flagged, and then we can have a conversation. Question, are you doing it, or do you think it's something good to do? It could be recommended to do that. It's not the process yet. Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Your 2 minutes are up.
Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gallivan, I wonder if I could, I'm going to follow up on a series of questions at previous meetings about housing for refugees. Now, if a student, for whatever reason, there's a number of students that try to follow the asylum process if they don't want to leave the country. But if they do that, what kind of housing funding do they get? Now, the minister had said to me, I'm in the Niagara region, so I'm both a border community and a tourism community. A number of hotels were taken over in Niagara Falls and used for about 18 months. The minister assured me that there's no more hotels being paid for asylum claimants. But I have been talking to people in my community, and there have been other motels, hotels that have been converted to apartments, technically. And I'm just wondering, is there a housing allowance that is given to those people?
Madam Chair, I think I'll start an answer, and happy to get offline to make sure we get a precise answer, because it's an important question. There had been an ask. The federal government funds other orders of government. There was a soft ask to cease the hotel program. I understand that was upgraded to a hard and fast rule, no more hotels. And so that process should be working its way, where the funding, even if it's passed to another order of government, doesn't end up in a hotel. But the conversion is a new issue to me. And so unless my officials happen to know, I'm going to have to follow up offline to get you a clear answer.
Okay, I know I don't have a whole lot of time, but the federal government just dedicated $40 million to buying a hotel here in Ottawa for asylum claimants. Is that going to be a regular occurrence across the country?
Again, my understanding of the progression of the decisions was an ask of those people in receipt of federal funds to cease the use of hotels, followed up by a hard condition in the terms and conditions through which the money flows. And so I had understood a tightening and a moving away from hotels. So you're talking about a conversion and now a second instance, a hotel in Ottawa. That seems to be inconsistent with the brief I've received. And so I don't think I have the right officials here to answer your question. I'm happy to provide a written answer.
Mr. Harris previously at the committee had testified to that. But look, I know. How much time do I have, Madam Chair?
2 minutes and a half.
Thank you. Can I follow up with Ms. O'Gorman, please? And again, because I'm a border community, I spent a lot of time in the Fort Erie area, and I see some of the issues that are affecting CBSA. When we get into a non-compliance situations, the CBSA inherits that because you are the enforcement arm when people need to be removed. And I asked a question earlier: are you funded sufficiently? Is your capacity? But like the minister has been saying, the Minister of Public Safety said he was hiring 1,000 new agents across the country, and that the first cohort had graduated recently. Do you know how many people actually graduated from that first cohort?
We have 42 people who have graduated. By June, we'll have had 100, and in June, we will have 180 at our college in Rigaud. So we do them in 3 class chunks. At any one time, there's 3 classes. People have just started midway through and graduating.
So is that just a normal yearly cohort?
Those are people we are hiring as a result of the commitment and now the funding to hire 1,000 officers.
But on a yearly basis, say over the last 5 years, would that be the equivalent number that you would have hired?
No.
So when your turnover rate and retirements and I mean, how many of that first cohort are just filling lost capacity?
None. So we are tagging people as people that are replacing attrition, either people who are retiring or people who are leaving their position for an inland job or a promotion. So our attrition overall has been down a little bit over the last 3 years. And so we will know in the coming months who we are putting through the college for attrition and who we are putting and tagging as 1,000 officers.
Okay, I wonder, Ms. O'Gorman, if you could undertake to provide us with, you may not have the numbers with you, but I'm looking for a net number of the, I mean, the minister made it sound like 1,000 is going to solve a problem. I don't think it's going to come anywhere near solving the problem, nor giving you the capacity you need to deal with the ever-evolving situation of people that need to leave the country. If you're now investigating and being responsible for removing people, I think you need more. You need more agents. You need more investigative agents. You need more capacity. Would you agree with that?
Well, as I said, the work of CBSA never ends. And so there is no magic number. We will put those 1,000 officers to good use. They will be net new officers. And so we will have the capacity in our college, and we're hiring people directly. So we are hiring trade officers who won't go through the college. So not every one of those 1,000 will need to be trained at Rigaud. I'd say about 80% of them will. It's just we'll have different skill sets that we're hiring for trade officers.
Thank you, Mr. Davies, way over, and thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. Next, we have 5 minutes for Ms. Zaid.
Thank you. My next question is for Madame O'Gorman. What progress has been made and how you are working with IRCC to make sure that you track whether students leave Canada after their permits have expired?
So I think Mr. Gallivan has nicely enumerated the work that IRCC will be doing. And to the question, we don't need CBSA to be involved too early on, because then we will be spending our resources to people who, may not have realized that their student visa had just expired or may have another application. So we need IRCC to go through and determine who is now out of compliance and not being brought into compliance. As Mr. Gallivan said, there's regular communication among us, and we will be providing data and information to IRCC in terms of people who have left the country. But I think it is important that we kind of divide up our work so that we're not overlapping and bringing enforcement officers to a case that IRCC can ably either bring back to compliance or determine has left the country.
My next question is for Mr. Gallivan. What lessons has IRCC learned from the issues which were identified with the student direct stream? And how are those lessons shaping your current policies?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. First, to clarify something about the student direct stream, Iran wasn't an eligible country. So I think there are legitimate concerns about representatives of the regime in the country, but the light touch, as it was described under the student direct stream, couldn't have been a source because that program wasn't open to Iran. I think back to the idea of control and managing risk. And so merely skipping steps for everybody creates a vacuum that attracts fraudsters and people who want to take advantage. And so, some of the automation and digitization that's taking place in IRCC is going to allow us to ingest information, do data analytics to set up our officers to make better decisions off cleaner data. And so rather than just kind of limiting 30 minutes to a review for everybody, I think the facts of somebody's circumstance and the facts of the country should dictate. In your report that I read last week, one of your recommendations is kind of a cap on countries where a large percentage or a large number of the student visa seekers turn around and claim asylum. That's a really important point. The IRCC going forward should be managing which countries on a per capita ratio basis generate the most asylum claims, and then what are the attributes of those claims, and then how can we find them. And so, again, I think the vision that we're trying to convey and the commitments we're making for 2026 are, instead of just waving a bunch of things through with a lighter touch, we're actually going to use data and analytics to understand what's the threat. Okay, it's people from certain countries who have a propensity to claim asylum. What are the attributes of those claims? What are the facts we should be looking for? And use the machine and our agents to kind of find those files and deny the visas in a first instance.
It's a good segue to my next question, that how IRCC is developing goals and measurable indicators to track progress on diversifying the international student population rather than just few countries.
Je vais commencer et ensuite peut-être tourner la page aux
I will
collègues.
start and give the floor to my colleagues, but personally, I think that Africa is a source for French-speaking people, and we have a new threshold to attract immigrants who speak French. So for me, that's a rich avenue for us. We need to push into looking to Africa, for French-speaking Africa, because that's a rich source of people. Alexa, do you want to add something?
Minority student pilot, which was launched in 2024. And pilot participants essentially arrive as study permit holders and then become eligible for permanent residence upon graduation along with their dependents. So that is one of the main things that we're trying to do to remove some of the barriers that we've seen from Francophone minority source countries in this particular program. It is a pilot, so we do need to assess the results. It's still kind of early days, but I think a rather promising track.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Zaid. Thank you. Next, we have 5 minutes for Mr. Ho. Mr. Ho.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Back to you, Ms. Hogan. So your report found 52 cases where people linked to fraudulent documentation or misrepresentation later received international study permit extensions. So in your professional view, does that point to an immigration system that was too permissive after these fraud indicators were known?
I mean, I think this points to one of my key findings was that IRCC had a lot of information at their disposal and they didn't effectively follow up when their own processes identified fraud indicators. And we would expect that those kinds of things are not ignored.
So in practical terms, just as a high level from your audit, do you think that this Liberal government is addressing just the symptoms of this immigration crisis, or are they addressing some of the causes as well?
Well, I think the International Student Program was one of the programs meant to help contribute to lowering the immigration level. There was a goal set to reduce the number of temporary residents, and reducing the number of international study permits was a key contributor to getting there. I think the goal was achieved. That decline was much sharper, however, than expected.
Do you think the goal of restoring integrity of the immigration system is achieved?
Well, again, I can't speak to the whole immigration system. We focused in on the
On this
international
program.
student programs, and while they added some measures to improve the integrity, so verifying that the letters of acceptance from the universities were authentic, there are many instances that we cited where they had information and did not act on these integrity concerns. And that's why we provided recommendations to really improve the integrity process. The reforms were meant to reduce the numbers, but also improve integrity, and there's work left to be done on the latter.
Next set of questions are for the officials of the IRCC. How long does an investigation into international student fraud case take on average?
It would vary. In some cases, it could be seconds because we confirm the person has status. And in other cases, it could be quite extensive. So really the facts would vary. It would be a range. But again, back to the 153K, just in a few months, we've been able to take 78% of those and say 78% of those people have a normalized status in the country. So some of them are quite quick, others can be quite long.
So of the other 22%, how long would that, on average, like roughly speaking? Would it be years, months?
Well, again, I think, Madam Chair, I appreciate the question. I think this year our commitment is to put them into better buckets because the 33K or so that are left, some of those will have left the country. Others, once we begin the research, we might find answers. But I think the commitment would be this calendar year to at least know we're down to a smaller number that require more aggressive treatment, and those cases can be quite long.
So when an international student permit has expired and they decide to overstay their visa, these individuals, how long would it take for your department to figure that out?
I can't answer the question in terms of how long it would take the department to take. Back to the earlier testimony, and our game plan going forward, though, is to actually talk to people before the expiry because they should have purchased tickets and made plans to leave the country before they followed a status. So they would either be renewing as a student, they would be transferring to a different status, or they'd be purchasing a plane ticket. So our plan is to talk to them before that day arrives.
Okay, so how long will it take before, so once that process plays out and individuals continues to overstay their visa, how long will it take before they're ordered deported if the individual exhausted all the appeals process?
1 minute.
Madam Chair, I appreciate the question that some people do have appeal rights throughout the whole continuum, but in the case of somebody with an expired visa, I think our intention is to act immediately. To contact people before that expiration date, and then
you don't know how long it would take on average.
Okay, so we have not yet implemented the program, and so it would be difficult for me to kind of talk about a sweet spot in terms of referral to CBSA or not, because
the CBSA officials here. So once someone has been ordered deported and referred to the CBSA, but still refuses to leave voluntarily, how long will it take for your department on average to remove this individual?
So I'm going to say the same thing. It depends. We will call them in for an interview, and then we will talk about their circumstances, and we will work with them.
But on
to leave
average,
the
how
country.
long will it take?
There's no average. There's people who leave immediately. There's people
no average.
who, well,
there's got to be an average.
Thank you, Mr. Ho, and thank you, Ms. O'Gorman. That is time. And please remember not to speak over each other. It is hard for our interpreters. Next, we have 5 minutes from Mr. Zuberi.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Chair, and to all the witnesses again for being here. Just wanted to continue with the IRCC representatives. So I've gone through the Auditor General report, and I know that you have a diversification strategy for international students, which has been showing some progress in the last years. If you see the tables relating to 2023, 24 to 25, there is progress being made. But, you know, in our offices and constituencies, we hear regularly still about student wait times being uneven wait times for the evaluation of student visas. There are still some comparatives being made by people originating from different countries that there doesn't seem to be an even-handed approach. Are you seized by this question about wait times, number one? Number two, about making sure that there is an even-handed approach when it comes from people from different countries with respect to admissions within Canada, student admissions, that is. and visas.
Madam Chair, I'll first start by just quickly going back to the exchange we just had, just to remind the committee, the OEG report was delivered in March. That was the previous month. So we have preliminary plans. We've started to take action, but if I don't have a full and complete answer in terms of how long it takes to do something, it's because I'm acting on a report that we received last month. I hope to do better next time. I sense the frustration, but this is a report that landed weeks ago, and we're in the early phases of implementing our action plan. In terms of wait times, back to that concept of control, I do think the OEG audited management controls. Did management have the information it needed to make decisions? Did it have the right procedures, practices, and IT systems in place? And so I do believe that DPM, an IT, iterative IT system that we're building, will give us better information to both act more quickly on legitimate claims and then flag aside the claims that aren't legitimate. So imagine machine learning that's scanning the integrity of documents. We'll learn what a diploma from a certain university is supposed to look like, and we'll be able to detect if it's been doctored. And so I do think some of the investments we continue to make in IT and this idea of control lets us pass the legitimate students through more quickly, which we need to do, and at the same time flag those that deserve greater scrutiny.
So when you see unevenness between, let's say, neighboring countries with respect to wait times, gross differences, do you take note of that, and do you start putting in resources to make sure that those differences don't exist?
Well, I think the first step is to understand the driver for that. And so is there a greater propensity to fraud? Is it a system that we're just not familiar with? So I think first we got to understand why there is a discrepancy. When there's a discrepancy in a claim too, and it's not deliberate fraud or evasion, but just a mistake, again, we have IT systems that we can update on a weekly basis. And so maybe we're not asking the question clearly. Maybe we need to reframe how the form is designed. And so we now have IT systems that can do that. And so I think, again, it depends on the reason for the discrepancy. If it's because we're not clear in our instructions or there's some kind of linguistic barrier that we have to overcome.
Certainly. And I hope that the Chair indulges me a bit, given my time was taken up by a question that wasn't my own. But in terms of, so I hope that you're alive to this issue about the differences from here on in, if you aren't already. Is that correct? And I'm assuming there was an interplay between you and CBSA, IRCC and CBSA in terms of the evaluation of these visas, because there is some screening that must be done by CBSA before a visa is issued. Student visa, that is.
Madam Chair, I appreciate there's a question behind the question, that there's a concern with discrepancies between certain countries, and I'm happy to take that back and take action on it.
Thank you. I want to now quickly ask one last question around if you are alive to the concerns around foreign interference, foreign influence as you are screening for students, and just explain to the committee how you are actually live to those concerns.
Our visa officers would have all kinds of indicia and indicators. They would have training. We're working on certification of our staff. And so there would be a series of discretionary and mandatory referrals across a system, the suite of visa streams. And then they would make referrals to more expert security partners when those thresholds are met. Again, some of them are binary, yes, no, and others are more subjective.
Thank you, Mr. Gallivan, and thank you, Mr. Zuberi. C'est à vous, Monsieur Champoux, 2 minutes et demie.
Merci beaucoup. Over to you, Mr. Champoux, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. I was talking about something that was very of interest to me. I was asking Mr. Gallivan that why isn't it logical that over the years there hasn't been greater collaboration in sharing information, especially such important information about people who are in the country, who are not permanent residents, who are not citizens, who are waiting for a status. I do not understand why there isn't greater collaboration between CBSA and IRCC. Can you explain to me why it has never been the case? I think the culture of the agency that I inherit is to facilitate arrival and to do all of the work about the arrival. So there was a lot of effort made for arrival, and they stopped there, and there was no interest after that. And so yes, there is a small percentage of irregularities, but despite that, there has to be work done in that regard. Question. You said you had this report 1 month ago, so that's your defense in not having additional effort. But I have to say that this report dates from 2023, so it's not a great surprise when the report was published in March. So you should have already been informed about it. Do you think that you have made progress since you had this information well before the appearance of this report? Do you think you have made progress as a department? Well, we had a 4-year plan to be more rigorous with our student programs. And so, as I said earlier, we know that there has been some progress made with respect to validation letters. We have been making some progress there. So I think that we have made some progress over the first 2 years, but in the 4-year mandate that we have given ourselves, we still have 2 years left. I'll be quick because I have little time. Well, with respect to suspected fraud or with questionable cases, among the cases that have been investigated, did you see a constant situation? Did you suspect maybe organized fraud or an organized network of fraud? Did you maybe notice that it came from a certain region of the world so that we can be more vigilant about applications coming from that part of the world? Did you have such lessons learned? My opinion is that our work was not sophisticated enough to answer such questions. We need to process these files in a deeper and broader way to be able to answer your question. So as far as you know, you didn't have an observed constant situation.
For Mr. Redekop and 1.5 minutes for Mr. Fragiscatos, please.
Ms. Hogan, so you've had a chance to look under the hood and see into the inner workings of IRCC. Are there other areas that should be looked at?
Within the immigration department, well, I would expect that the department would take some of the findings here and say we should act on integrity information we already know. There's some really good systems. They have a great risk assessment unit, but they're not really acting on the information that comes out of it. So I would hope that they would expand that and use it throughout the whole department so that the next time I do come in and look at something, they'll be acting on integrity from start to finish.
Well, I just think Mr. Gallivan should honestly be ashamed and embarrassed that it took you and your team to come in and actually highlight all of these situations and issues that Canadians have known about for years, frankly, to actually find these problems and force the department to make some changes. So glad to hear there's changes coming. Thank you guys for your work. Appreciate this. It's very enlightening. And of course, I know it's not just you, it's your team, and you get all the glory, they do all the work. I know how that works, but I appreciate you guys, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Redekop. Thank you, Ms. Hogan. Mr. Fragiscatos.
Chair, thank you to all of you for your public service. I'll just leave it at that. People being ashamed and being called out like that, I'm not sure that's very constructive to the purposes of this committee. Regardless, I have 1.5 minutes. Mr. Gallivan, I was going to come back to the issue of universities, but I think you were clear in that answer, and I want to go in another direction, in fact. You talked about data and specifically analytics. Can you talk a bit further about how a focus in that realm will ensure greater system integrity in our immigration system?
Sure. Briefly, Madam Chair, one of the frustrations I have about the cases we didn't follow up on is that's a rich source of criteria to apply on the screen up front. So in other words, cases of suspected fraud that we didn't follow up on to understand the methodology, the pattern, was intel that we couldn't put into the analytics system that the Auditor General just said was quite good. And so we definitely have missed that opportunity. And so I think that's an example of how analytics can work. We take any case of identified fraud that we find and follow up on, and we unpack it, and then we put it in the front end so that all new visas going forward are screened against that fact pattern. If we find somebody trying to do the same thing, fool me once, kind of shame on you, fool me twice. And we're trying to stop the fool me twices.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiscatos, and thank you, Mr. Gallivan. Je tiens à remercier les témoins d'aujourd'hui.
I'd like to thank all of today's witnesses.
I want to also echo the thanks. Thanks to you, Ms. Hogan, Ms. O'Gorman, and Mr. Gallivan. Thanks to you and your respective teams for the excellent work that you all do and the important work that you do and the important contributions you've made today to our study. And thank you for your patience in answering all questions. Thanks to my colleagues for the great questions. And with that, I will adjourn our meeting. Oh, sorry, before I adjourn our meeting on Wednesday is going to be witnesses for our continued immigration study. Please make sure that you know that there's a different room change. It's in Wellington Building, room 415. Room 415. So do not come here, room 415. And that is it. Thank you. This meeting's adjourned.